Good morning, everyone. Andy Moss here with another look at the weekly charts here on Saturday morning. And we had a little bit of selling on Friday afternoon that felt a little abrupt in the moment, right? It was a little sharp and it kind of came on the heels of a strong close on Thursday. So we're going to take a quick look at that. But here's the weekly chart on S&P, the SP 500. SPX, and we see here last couple of weeks was pretty strong off of this bounce from the breakout anchored VWAP, and then a little bit of a consolidation, not quite an inside candle here, but a high level consolidation there. And I want to go over quickly to the daily charts, and here was Thursday's close, which was very strong and up to new highs, and that was followed quickly by pretty persistent selling on Friday. And so a couple things I want to look at here is towards the tail end of last week's weekly chart video, I pointed out a couple of things here. We had come a long way in a short distance on SPYs and Qs, and then we had a bit of a indicator here on this candle that maybe a rest was due. We had a DeMark 9 sell setup trigger here, and I just mentioned that maybe some consolidation was coming, and so it wasn't a very clean consolidation if you look at this kind of broadening range here throughout the week. But these are the levels we're watching on the daily chart. Here's a VWAP from the low. Here's the 21-day and the 50-day moving averages. And, this is Friday's action. Looks, that's pretty steep selling, right? Took the Qs all the way back down to this 613 level where we have, again, a VWAP off the low and a 21-day and a 50-day moving average. And so, and a little bit of a gap area here just below that. So it looks a little dramatic on the daily chart, and that's really what I wanted to point out was, this is why we step back and consider the weekly charts every Saturday morning, because we got to get a bit of big picture context about what's actually going on in that action. So let's get back to our weeklies, and we can see that despite the selling on Friday, this is still a high level consolidation here on the S&P 500, and the Qs hadn't come quite as far, hadn't made that new high, and it's a little more drastic selling here, kind of an outside candle here, or call it a bearish engulfing if you want to, but it's still a high level consolidation. We're still holding this 4-week moving average, and here's the 10-week moving average and the VWAP from underneath. So the same support levels I just showed on the daily chart right in here is exactly what we're seeing over here on the weekly chart. So it's important to consider the multiple time frames and see how they align in the pictures they show on each. So there's SPX and the Qs. On the other side of that selling, we had the Dow Jones made a new high. It just continues to march along, and RSI is in a healthy range. Volume is back up right at this average level, and kind of the same thing for IWM. It closed a little more in the center of the range. It's got a long upper shadow here, and kind of resting on this pivot area here at 252.77 with a close just above that. But small caps and industrials, financials, that kind of thing are those were the leaders last week. So moving overseas to the rest of the world, the ACWX, you guessed it, more of the same. High level consolidation here at recent highs with all the moving averages coming up underneath. RSI is in a healthy area and volume is in a healthy area. Looking at China specifically, a little more weakness here in China, which is a theme that we've been noticing. It's not breaking down on a big picture level, although we do see, if you like this consolidation pattern here, it is lower from that, and I wouldn't call that catastrophic, but we've got plenty of potential support pretty close underneath in a pivot area, a trend area, the 40-week moving average, and the VWAP off of this low back in April here. So maybe China wants to come down and test the 37, mid 37 range, or even in the low 37s here. RSI still trending lower, but holding in the upper bullish upper half overall. So no big concerns there on China yet, but it is it's not making progress higher like much of the rest of the world and the U.S. indices here. Into bonds. We were looking at bonds last week as showing a little bit of weakness, and so here's the AGG down kind of at the bottom of this little shaded area, and it looks susceptible for a move back down into maybe this trend line and the 40-week moving average here. It's in the lower half of the Bollinger Bands now. RSI is still just above 50, and it's not finding its way higher. And looks like it could actually go a bit lower next week, but it really could do either. TLT, the Treasury bonds did lose this pivot area that we looked at last week. So a little bit of a continued breakdown here over the last 3 weeks. Even as the Fed comes out and lowers rates, the price of Treasury bonds moving lower tells us that the rate market doesn't necessarily agree. Granted, we're looking at two different time frames on those interest rates there, so that's not an apples to apples comparison, but just pointing that out there. TLT looks like, that trip mentioned last week of a possibility moving down towards this 85 area is still very much in play. RSI below 50 and volume about normal there. So TLT looks like it could have a little more downside ahead of it. We'll have to wait and see. And high yield bonds, which they usually trade pretty much in line with stocks, they're in a middling range here, right still around the middle of the Bollinger Bands. RSI right in the center. The bands are flat. The moving averages are really pretty flat. And here's the 4-week and the 10-week right there close by. So just more indecision and consolidation there from high yield. The dollar did reverse pretty hard off of this. We mentioned the test here of the rising 10-week and the declining 40-week, and the dollar hit pretty hard. This line here really doesn't matter. That's just a reference to show the rounding bottom. So don't take that as potential support for this move here. I'll just go ahead and get that off the chart. But the dollar is not out of the woods yet. So it continues to battle with this support area, or excuse me, now resistance area. It was support back here, and now it is resistance through here, and looks like it could have some more downside ahead of it as well. Bitcoin continues to be a mess. This is a low level or a bearish consolidation pattern here. It's stuck in this range. It's stuck below this VWAP from the August low. It's got the moving averages moving down overhead. And so the higher probability result for Bitcoin is a trip back down into this area. And maybe it even comes all the way down to this pivot here at 74,420, something in that area. This is a bearish consolidation pattern for Bitcoin. Heading into commodities, whoops, still can't get, it's just this $23 area continues to be a challenge. It couldn't get above it here. It couldn't stay above it here or here. And then it really made a better try back in June that was quickly rejected. Couldn't quite do it here. It's gathering steam. So, the more times a level of support or resistance is tested, the more likely it becomes that it eventually gives way. And so we keep seeing these higher lows on the GSG overall commodity index, but it can't quite get the move to get and stay above this bit of a pivot area here. So that's still developing. It's not breaking down. It is below the 4 and the 10-week moving average, but it's still in the upper half of the Bollinger Bands. We still have a 40-week moving average down here. It's still in the upper half of the RSI channel, and we can even put a, so look how this is held here and here and here. So, certainly not a breakdown unless we get down into this lower half of the bands and kind of take out this VWAP and this moving average here. So commodities still just, slowly grinding a little bit higher overall on that. Now, precious metals, of course, are the leader, one of the leaders in that space. Here's DPB looking at those things together, and you can see this is a nice breakout, rising volume. And RSI continues to just look, it couldn't even get back below 70 over here on this dip. And now we're rising again and looking at the components there individually. Gold, similar look there. but did not get the breakout. And so that tells us that we know the action came from silver. And just look at this. The move on silver continues to be astonishing. Just up and up and up, and no real sign of rest here yet. It is pretty extended. And so, like back here, it was pretty extended and it moderated and came back in a little bit. So we're kind of seeing that situation again as the RSI is very high at 84. We're pushing the Bollinger Bands steeply higher, and the moving averages have nice separation between them and are all trending higher. So it's a strong trend on big volume, but it is a little extended there. So that's something to watch on silver. Volatility, it's pretty quiet, right? It's just staying low down here in the 16 area and doesn't show too much excitement there for volatility. And now we're going to move into the relative strength measures. Here is growth versus value. We see value kind of carried the torch this week, being stronger than the growth sector and back down into this area. The shaded area was a little bit of resistance and then maybe a little bit of support. And now we're back in here to test it as RSI value is picking up some steam here relative to growth recently. Here is the consumer discretionary versus consumer staples. You know, a little bit of upward progress. So the discretionary still is getting more of the buying power, but you know, again, kind of a wide and maybe a little bit of a messy pattern through here as these two relationships really, you know, they kind of stay neck and neck overall. High beta versus low volatility had a breakout move, but reversed pretty hard. So if you think about, you know, people shifting towards value and some of the lesser known or smaller names away from mega cap growth and that kind of thing, which we'll look at further here in a few minutes. So this maybe is, you know, this is a potential reversal candle here. So this relationship maybe comes back down into this area next week, and it could just as easily hold this kind of pivot here. So we'll see what happens with high beta. But after a very large move over the past 3 or 4 weeks, it's taken a little bit of a break here, which is not unusual. So while I'm at it, cap weight versus equal weight, this coincides with the growth value play, right? And a shift away from some of the mega cap, some of the high flyers, and into some of the smaller companies represented there by the equal weight S&P 500 RSP. And it's right back into nearing the center of the Bollinger Bands here, but still trending nicely higher. RSI still holding in the upper half. And same kind of situation for the cap weight versus equal weight Qs. Just a piece of the puzzle, not incredibly relevant or important information, but just something that we like to look at every now and again to kind of round out the picture and get more context there. So semiconductors, this is the semiconductor index. Yeah, a little bit of maybe a little bit of a double top pattern here for the last 6, 8 weeks, that kind of thing. So semis, which you know everybody's looked at Nvidia. We know that semiconductors aren't exactly running away. Broadcom had earnings this week and sold off a bit. And, you know, this is after such a huge run. Action like this should not be surprising. It's still in an uptrend. It's still pushing the Bollinger Bands higher. It's still in the upper half and above all the moving averages with RSI firmly in the bullish area for now. And now let's take a look at some breadth measures. We see this is the percentage of S&P 500 stocks above a 50-day moving average and a 200-day moving average. So this took a turn back higher after a slight dip last week that I mentioned was, you know, not anything terribly alarming, still holding above the halfway level. It is, you know, a bit of a downtrend here overall. Maybe this picks back up and continues this move higher in coming weeks. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But the percentage over a 200-day is, you know, flat overall here, but moving a little higher this week as we see the indices rise. And then looking at our other breadth measure, the bullish percent indices. Here are the percentage of S&P 500 stocks on a point and figure buy signal on the chart. And again, after a huge run, it backed off here a little bit. It's not in a new column of O's. It's barely off this high here at the 60 area. And 59.80 is how it closed the week. Let's go over to the NASDAQ. Here's the bullish percent index on the NASDAQ 100. Again, a little pull over, little deeper pullback, but not enough to create a new column of O's, finding a little bit of polarity here. What was support, then broken, now became resistance, and this is kind of where this move stopped for now. It's probably too early to call it resistance at this point because we don't have a new column of O's, but it is, looks to have been an important area, and we see how this shakes out here. And finally, the NYSE bullish percent index also, no thank you, also holding up, pretty well here with just a slight, it actually added a new X this week, and just a slight pullback there by the end of the week. So there's what we've got in the big picture, the weekly charts there, and nothing alarming. Actually, let's go back over here to the PY and the Qs on the daily. This is, as we've been saying for a couple of weeks now, a big move in a short time frame. It needed a little consolidation, and this could set up to show a decent opportunity for a stronger end of year and on into a Santa Claus rally kind of stage here. What I would like to see at this point is the SPYs coming down, maybe even a little deeper here into this 675 area, 676s, that kind of thing, and spend a day or two consolidating before we set up into a strong second half of December and in a good year-end rally. The Qs are already a little deeper in that level. And so, maybe a quick undercut of this, or even a couple of days of lower level consolidation here in the 613s, 614 area, and then kind of the same thing, potential for a strong year-end rally. It could go either way. I don't know what's going to happen. That is one possible scenario that I will be on the lookout for, and we'll see what shakes out. But overall, we've got high level consolidations in the indices. We've got low volatility. The dollar is declining, which theoretically adds a tailwind for stocks and commodities and that kind of thing. And it looks to be pretty good setup heading into the year, or at least the potential for a pretty good setup heading into the second half of December and on into year end. I will take just one very quick moment to look at a couple of individual names in the Mag 7 theme. Apple, nothing much going on there with Apple. It's holding up very well. Amazon is consolidating. This strong 3 week rise here has come back and now kind of moderating and consolidating. It's heading lower there at the end of the week, but I'll have to see, can it get back above these kind of flat moving averages here, and the declining 4 week and a kind of a flat 10 week there. Does Amazon get some strength into year end? Google, it's just such an incredible trend here. And so now it's pulled back a little bit. They have another opportunity ahead of it. Meta had a big jump on some news that didn't stick around, and now it's back. So it's still got work to do below a 10 week, below a 40 week moving average. And with this 4 week kind of trying to add a little support down here, but it's in the lower half of the bands. RSI is below 50, and so Meta looks susceptible for potentially a trip back down into this 567 area. Microsoft, look at this bearish consolidation pattern on Microsoft. Now the 40 week, aka the 200-day moving average, is providing support here so far, but after this move and kind of a pennant pattern here, bearish consolidation, Microsoft has a couple of cautionary things to consider here. There's a pivot from back here around $467. It's been trying to hold that. If this breaks lower and takes out the rising 40-week moving average, Microsoft would look pretty dangerous down below this line here. We'll have to keep a close eye on that. NVIDIA, just kind of hanging around. The Bollinger Bands are very tight and very flat. It's in the 51% area on RSI, and a rising VWAP from this pivot low in April and 40-week moving average here. So this could really go either way. NVIDIA's not running away to new ground and staying there as of yet. Tesla is one of the leaders. It's after this consolidation and a bit of a sell-off and recovery here. Tesla looks primed for a potential move back to all-time highs and maybe beyond. And actually, am I right here? This was It looks like that's a new all-time weekly closing high on Tesla there this week. This it closed at 458.96, and the next closest looks over here at 456. So yeah, that's a new weekly closing high for Tesla, and it continues to gather strength. Last one, Netflix, kind of a disaster area lately. It's just just a cascading sequence of action, lower and lower and lower. It's below the moving averages. RSI is getting pretty low here, and it did hit there's an anchor here from this pivot back in April, and a weekly DeMark buy setup. So RSI is not quite washed out. If I was really looking for a recovery in Netflix here, I would maybe see the RSI get a little deeper, a little more oversold. But I've got selling here, very high volume over the last couple of weeks, and it is getting a DeMark buy setup and testing this VWAP here. So potential, certainly no guarantee, but it's something to keep on your radar. Is can the sellers finally be done in Netflix and give it, if nothing else, maybe a little bit of a relief rally next week? We'll have to wait and see. That's to be determined. And as for the calendar, heading into next week, we do have some housing data, kind of the normal economic information coming out, building permits, maybe a little jobs and payroll data. The only real stinger potentially is, forgive me while I scroll around here way too fast. We do get CPI next Thursday at 8:30. So, inflation continues to be a hot topic, and that is something that could move markets, at least in the short term, next week on Thursday at 8:30 a.m. So be aware that is coming. And that's about it. That's a quick look at the weekly charts. I hope you find these helpful. I hope the video format is working okay for you. I will download all these charts and put them in the chart pack for you to look at again. And let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any feedback. Please share this with your other trader and friends and market enthusiasts, and we will see what happens next week.